Popescu here, and I am here in America on the 4th of July, which is a big holiday for us. It is known as Independence Day, and I very deliberately chose this day to celebrate the launch of my new venture called Firebird Healing, which is going to be a trauma healing program that I'm going to tell you more about during our talk today. But I just wanted to talk a little bit first to start about why I chose the 4th of July. Here in America, Independence Day was the day that America declared its independence from the oppression and control of the British back in 1776. And what I see in my work so much that I really focus on is helping people become free of their limitations. So that can include things like trauma, things like core false beliefs, all the things that the stories that we tell ourselves that keep us from being the infinite beings that we truly be. Because fundamentally, we are beings of love and light. We are infinite. We have infinite possibilities available to us, but many of us are not functioning from that reality. Instead, we're functioning from our conditioning, from our domestication, from our traumas and dramas. And what I'm looking to create in the world, especially with Firebird, is a way out of that. So to tell you a little bit about how freedom and independence has shown up in my life, I am the child of 2 immigrant parents. I'm first generation American. I was born here in the United States. And my parents really, I would say, went through hell to come here and give me those freedoms. They were children. My whole ancestry is from Romania. And Romania at the time of World War II, when my parents were children, they were about 7 or 8 years old. During World War II, maybe they were a little older, but during that time, anyways, before Russia came into Romania to make it communist, basically, and sort of a satellite of the Soviet Union, as we all know. Very interesting how history is repeating itself right now. We had Nazis, and the Nazis came in to Romania as well. And every day, I would listen to my parents tell stories, especially from my mother, who was in Bucharest, the capital. Every day there were air raids and sirens and bombings and things. And it was very terrifying. And, I knew that early on in my career, I knew that my parents' experiences had somehow shaped me, but I really had no idea until I got deeper into the work that I now do, especially with energy psychology and learning about, things like family constellations and all of that, and epigenetics, and having an understanding that the trauma that my parents went through also impacted me. In fact, I had a chiropractor who once told me, we were working on, he's a chiropractor, Rolfer, and he was working on my body. And I said, it feels like my body is still at war. Like there's so much intensity and this fighting energy and whatever. And he's like, yeah, well, think about this. You were an ovum in your mom's body when she was a little girl experiencing those things. And it had never really occurred to me about that and how that imprints on us. Because what we now know about trauma is that it changes the way your genes function. And so my parents and their parents, and go as far back as you will, that energy of those traumatic experiences imprinted in my mother's DNA. It changed the way it functioned, and then that got passed on to me. So, their early life experiences clearly impacted my life's experiences and even my body and how I created my body. So that's one piece of it. And then, communism came and everything was taken away. My father's family had a bit, of wealth, and all of it was confiscated. And then my parents lived in this very oppressive regime that was a dictatorship for 16 years, where you couldn't leave the country. You had very little freedom. The Securitat, which was like the KGB, was watching your every move. Your neighbors might be spying on you. And I don't know if I've told this story in public before, which is probably why I'm sharing it today. So my parents plotted for years and years, how are we going to get out of here and create a better life for ourselves and any children we have, because we don't want them born here in Romania in this oppressive regime, and where you had you didn't even have electricity 24/7. There would be rolling blackouts because there wasn't enough electricity to go out around for everyone. And then they had to stand in line for hours for a roll of toilet paper or a loaf of bread. So it was very traumatic for them to experience that. And then back in, I believe it was 1968, Ceausescu, the dictator, finally allowed people to leave tourist trips to go visit other places, but they wouldn't let the whole family go because they knew what might happen with that. So they would only let one member of a family go, with the expectation that then, of course, they'll come back because they're not going to leave their family behind. Well, my father, being the clever finagler he was, somehow was able to get both him and my mom on a trip, on a train trip through Europe. That was going its destination was Vienna. And my parents somehow knew, maybe through Radio Free Europe or something like that, because back then we didn't have internet. They knew that there was a refugee camp in Vienna and they plotted to defect there. And they couldn't tell their families because they might risk, getting reported. They couldn't even talk about it in their apartment. My parents would hatch their plan walking. So they were always in motion. They'd be walking the streets of Bucharest talking so nobody could overhear them, right? They were always aware of who was watching and all of that. And they managed to get themselves on this train. And I remember, they were, all their belongings were checked. They had government officials somehow supervising them and holding their passports. They couldn't even hold their own passports. And I remember my parents telling me that they hid a ring. I should be wearing that ring. They hid my mother's grandmother's ring and I think some stamps or something of value, whatever they had that was of value that they managed to hide from the communists. They hid it behind the toilet tank in the public bathroom, which was just crazy. And then they got to Vienna. They basically escaped their guides and didn't have their passports, but made it to that refugee camp, lived in that refugee camp for 6 months. My father actually, who was a doctor, actually worked in a factory because they made you work. And eventually they were able to come, not to the United States, but to Canada, because Canada was more open to immigrants at that time. It was very difficult to get into the US and they needed doctors. My dad was a doctor. So they came to Canada with $10 in their pocket. And I remember my father hearing that my father was really, really sick when he got there. I guess his gallbladder had burst or something, and he was very ill. But my parents made it to Canada. They had a Romanian doctor helping them out. They somehow got their hands on a restaurant, and my mom worked 3 shifts, breakfast, lunch, and dinner in a restaurant while my dad was trying to get his licenses to practice medicine in Canada. Fast forward 3 years, they were in Edmonton and then in Calgary. And then my parents were able to, my mom got pregnant because apparently I wasn't going to be born in a communist country. That wasn't going to happen. My mom got pregnant and they came to the United States. My dad was able to get a job in Charleston, West Virginia, which is really funny because they didn't know what West Virginia looked like or was like. They just saw mountains. They saw on the map Appalachian Mountains, and they thought, oh, mountains, we love mountains. Mountains in Romania, the Carpathians, are like the Alps, real gray, rock, tall mountains. And West Virginia has rolling hills. So it was very different than they thought it would be, and it was lovely. And then they experienced stuff there too. There was definitely some amount of racism and xenophobia. Growing up, I was made fun of for my name, all kinds of things. But that was the beginning. And that's a long story, but I think it speaks to the spirit, of the Phoenix bird, and which is the symbol of Firebird healing. It's you can be a Phoenix bird rising from the ashes. My parents' tenacity and their determination to overcome the traumatic experiences that they had early in life and to pursue freedom for themselves and for me, because they really wanted their child to have freedom to choose whatever she wanted to be, that they were able to accomplish that. And that determination, that spirit, that fire that I think both my parents had is really infused in my life and my work and what I'm trying to create here with Firebird. Firebird is, my vision for it is to be the premier trauma treatment program in America, if not the world. Because what I know about working with trauma after 25 plus years of doing it professionally, and then my whole lifetime of dealing with things in my own life, which includes early life traumas. My parents had a horrible divorce when I was very young. My father died when I was 15. When I was in my early 20s, I developed a mysterious illness that doctors could not figure out what I had or even be able to help me with. And that ended up becoming chronic fatigue syndrome and Lyme disease. So I was able to, through the work that I now do as a professional, I was able to heal myself of the illness that I had developed that was so debilitating that at one point, I was in grad school on the floor, lying down, wondering if I was ever going to make it. I was so sick at that point. And yet that persistence and tenacity that my parents had shown me and infused my DNA with allowed me to overcome those limitations that I had, where literally my body was trying to stop me from creating what I wanted to create. I was able to finish my PhD. I was able to heal from that and create what I've created today. At this point, having worked with thousands of people and really giving them, more than anything, giving them the knowing or helping them find their own knowing that they too can heal from all of their traumas or whatever it is that's holding them back. Because the only reason anything is really holding you back is your belief that it can. Because we know people, even people in wheelchairs, people with all kinds of issues, health issues and whatnot, we know that they've been able to, if they choose it, that they can be like that phoenix bird rising from the ashes and actually create an incredible life for themselves. So what I'm seeing in the world right now is really a revolutionary time. We are in another, similar to kind of what happened in America in 1776, we are in this process of proclaiming our independence from the oppression of this reality, from the traumas and horrible experiences that are happening all around us and that have happened to many of us personally, and to also change the dynamic of what is happening here, where there's so much hatred and anger and rage and just insanity. I mean, just look at the news every day. It's another crazy story of people losing their minds. I think we're in an existential time where a lot of people are really questioning, what am I doing here? And for those of us that have been doing the work on ourselves, you can call us light workers, healers, whatever it is, we are aware that we're on the cusp of a whole new reality. Except the problem is it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I've spoken fairly openly about that. My awareness of it is we're not through the worst of it yet. So for Firebird to emerge, for it to rise at this time, when there is so much chaos and intensity and confusion and shifting and all of that, where the earth feels like it's unstable beneath us, now is the time more than ever that this program is needed. So that is my story of my creation story of Firebird. What we are going to be offering with this program is classes, workshops, first starting online. My vision for Firebird actually started pre-pandemic, and it was going to be an in-person intensive outpatient program similar to what I do at Avery Lane, the rehab where I am the clinical director. But instead, given the pandemic circumstances and in-person being more difficult at this time, I decided to just go with small offerings online. And so the first of those, our inaugural workshop, will be a class that I'm doing with my good friend and colleague, TJ Woodward, the creation of conscious recovery, called Healing from Trauma and Addiction. And it's a 3-part online Zoom class. based on our work with Conscious Recovery, he and I co-authored several workbooks, including the Conscious Recovery for Addiction workbook. We're going to be using material from that. It's going to be experiential, where you're really getting a chance to write about and share with the group your experiences, and then looking at how can we apply some of the spiritual principles that he talks about in the book to help us, particularly living in the question, to help us shift the ways in which trauma has impacted our lives, and addiction, the way it may have emerged as a brilliant strategy to try, and I put that in quotes, brilliant strategy, to help overcome the pain of that unresolved trauma. So I think it's very exciting. I'm super excited. And there's some other creations in the works as well. I just actually spoke with Lauren Polly yesterday, who is actually a great friend and colleague, a fellow Access Consciousness facilitator. She was for a long time. And she wrote this incredible book called The Other Side of Bipolar. Lauren is someone who really, she works as a speech therapist in a hospital, and she really understands, like I do, particularly, we've taken front and center view of what has happened with medical and healing professionals in this pandemic time. She's been in the hospital, and I've been in mental health, where we have just seen an insane surge in the need for mental health services. And she's been working frontline with the COVID pandemic. We all know how it's been for the doctors and nurses and other people working in that field. And so she and I are going to create a multi-part series on self-care SOS, self-care for the caregiver, which is going to be some really practical tools for dealing with taking care of yourself in the midst of traumatic experiences. Because for nurses, doctors, and other healthcare professionals who are working in that environment, it's like being in a war zone, or it has been in this time with the COVID and everything else that's been going on. I mean, just the insanity of like how many mass murders we have here in America, for example. So they are exposed to a tremendous amount of trauma. And we want to offer some really simple, practical tools to just give them some ability to better stay connected with themselves and taking care of themselves and their well-being, while also providing care for others. I know I've needed these tools now more than ever. It's never been so busy in my field as what I've seen in these last couple of years. So that's one offering that's coming. We're going to be doing that in September. I have a whole list of amazing people that I want to bring on a podcast I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing a Triumph over Trauma is Firebird Healing's kind of tagline. And I want to do a podcast on triumphing over trauma and bring on some of the top, people who do trauma treatment work. We're going to explore different modalities. What I've found is the more holistic oriented modalities have been the most effective for healing trauma. So in my practice, I use things like energy psychology. So things like tapping, EFT tapping, or TFT, the original thought field therapy. There's also Be Set Free Fast, TAPAS acupressure technique, so many different modalities within energy psychology. NET, neuroemotional technique, is another modality I'm certified in. Brain spotting, which is an offshoot of EMDR. EMDR is a long-standing trauma treatment. Brain spotting is incredible. It was developed by a man named Dr. David Grand, who is based in New York. And he really developed his technique based on 9/11, because he was working with so many people that were survivors of 9/11 or impacted in some way by that traumatic event. So I've been really inspired by his work and found it incredibly helpful. So much so that I had all our therapists at Avery Lane trained in brain spotting, and they're also using energy psychology tools as well in their practices. And we're going to have a couple of them working for Firebird also. It's very exciting. We're going to be offering remote, and if you're local here in the Bay Area, we can do some in-person work as well with trauma individual therapy. We'll be doing some group stuff. We'll offer some support groups. And I have a whole list of incredible workshops, everything from the trauma of losing a pet or a relationship, or unresolved grief, perhaps workshops on the trauma of having an illness or injury of some sort. I mean, the list just is like this long of things that I want to explore with Firebird. And then the other thing I'm really looking at creating, and we're in the process of growing our library right now, is to offer resources, information. I really see Firebird as being like a clearinghouse for all things trauma related. So exploring different healing modalities and techniques, having articles that talk to us more about how trauma impacts us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. All different kinds of resources, support groups, things that I know are out there. And really, eventually would love to have more community around Firebird too. And I don't know what that might look like, but either a forum where people can share their stories, or maybe gathering live over Zoom or something where people, because one of the things that's the more difficult aspects of trauma is the piece of isolation and disconnection. People who are struggling with the after effects of trauma often feel isolated and alone. They may feel that other people don't understand what they're going through. So that I see from the work at the rehab how important it is to have community and to have connection with other folks who've been through things like what you've been through, who can understand what you're struggling with and can offer support, so you don't feel like you're all alone with it. I think that's really important. And I'm looking at how we can create that for Firebird. You know, maybe we can do that, some of that through social media. We have a Firebird group on Facebook. We're going to be on Instagram and LinkedIn, you know, so there might be something we can do with social media. I don't know. I'm really open to ideas and suggestions. So if you guys have any, or have any ideas for partnerships and collaborations, right now our partners include the people I've named, TJ and Lauren and Avery Lane. We're going to be doing some stuff with them. And I would love to, for professionals, this is also not just a resource for clients and the loved ones of people who might have issues with trauma, but also for healing professionals. I would love for Firebird to be able to offer continuing education for people to professionals to learn more about these healing techniques and how powerful they are. Because the reality is, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy is considered the gold standard in our field. And unfortunately, it falls short when it comes to trauma, because one of the things that happens when you are having the after effects of trauma is that your brain might be stuck in a fight, flight, freeze response. When you are in a full-blown fight, flight, freeze response, you are functioning from more primitive parts of your brain, and your prefrontal cortex, which is your logical human reasoning part of your brain, is offline. So cognitive behavioral therapy requires that part of your brain for you to be able to look at, what am I thinking and how is that making me feel, and what is that resulting, what behaviors are coming from that, what are the automatic thoughts I'm having about this, or the distorted ways I'm thinking about this, and what evidence do I have for and against these thoughts that I'm having that are creating this distress. Well, that's great if you're in a calm, neutral state, and or even a mildly activated state, and your prefrontal cortex is still online. But what happens when you're having a panic attack? Try doing CBT with someone who's in the midst of a full-blown panic attack. I haven't found that to be particularly effective. What I have found to be effective are techniques that calm your nervous system, which can be certain breathing techniques. It can be tapping or EFT. There's some cold water, immersing your face or hands in cold water, holding ice cubes, things like that activate your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve being connected to your amygdala, that emotional center of your brain that activates the fight, flight, freeze response, like working physiologically to get that body out of that traumatic response. That's what works. And so that's what we're going to be sharing information about through all of our teachings and resources through Firebird. I already have explored a lot of these topics on my podcast. Some of you know my Kaleidoscope of Possibilities podcast, and we'll share some of those episodes on Firebird, because there were a number of talks, that I've done with people, from Suzanne Connolly talking about TFT, the original tapping. We also talked about tapping with Mary Seiss and Dawson Church. We explored trauma with Erica Neal. We talked about healing from the body level up. with Amy St. Hilaire. I mean, there were so many, and forgive me, and Scott Walker with NET, the creator of neuroemotional technique, which for me was huge. My acupuncturist was doing NET on me way back when I was sick with Lyme disease, and it really created tremendous healing. Some of those traumas and the emotions that were still stuck in my body was a big part of my healing from my Lyme disease. And Access Consciousness has Access Bars is incredible, hands-on body processes. When we are able to do more in-person work, I'm definitely having that. And I really see Firebird also having treatment centers, probably more than one. Certainly something here in the Bay Area, and then who knows where else, where people can come and it be a safe healing space where we can gather in person to do work, individual therapy, group sessions. I would love to have that IOP program that I already designed and created, because there's such good content in there. And then ultimately, healing retreats, which is so funny because Ask and Receive, which is a big tool that I use and talk about a lot in my work, Ask and Receive. I've been saying to people that I really wanted for Firebird to be able to offer healing retreats all over the world in these beautiful places in nature. And pretty soon after I started talking about that, a lady approached me from Bali who offers healing retreats, helps people like me coordinate healing retreats in beautiful places like Bali. So I'm looking at that as a possibility for 2023, late 2023. So stay tuned for that. We might be doing some stuff on Bali, and just incredible, really, like so many ideas, so many possibilities. I'm really curious to find out what people are looking for. So I would love your feedback. What do you want to work on? What would you find helpful? What have you found helpful? And I'm really also going to be looking at collecting people's stories, stories of, times when you've been a Firebird, when you've healed something that's been traumatic and been like that phoenix bird rising from the ashes. I think sharing those stories is so important because it gives people that are still struggling hope, and it gives them ideas on how they might go about healing. And what we know from quantum physics is when we do the healing ourselves, it also changes the world. So my bigger target is to change the dynamics of what we are creating here on the planet, and to create a world that is happier and healthier and kinder and more caring and less judgmental and less trauma and drama. And I know that if we choose to heal that within ourselves that feels broken, it creates a ripple effect in the world. So, we're getting some feedback from folks watching. Thank you so much for sharing with us your story and this wonderful project. So much required in this world. Yes. And Ruth, actually, I was just talking with Ruth the other day. Another piece of Firebird that I'm looking at creating is a nonprofit aspect of it, where people who probably could not afford to get the kinds of services we're going to be offering, where they may not be able to have the resources to pay out of pocket for that, can still get some of our treatment, maybe through scholarships or through special programs or collaborating with nonprofits. I'm really open to that and curious about what's out there, particularly nonprofits that have as their target empowerment, right? Because fundamentally, that's what all my work is about. That's what Firebird is about, is empowering people to overcome their limitations, their imagined limitations, and the real challenges that they have experienced in their lives. Yes, thank you guys all. Yes, stories, lots of stories. Heather was also on my podcast and shared about her experiences. And I know she's gone through a lot as well with Lyme disease and other stuff. But truly, when you go through something like that, or if you've gone through cancer or any other kind of autoimmune thing or whatever kind of illness, and you come out the other side of it, you do feel like this phoenix bird rising from the ashes, truly, because you have no idea how devastating and difficult it is when you can't even get out of bed in the morning. I have had so many days like that in my life, and yet that fire and determination to get through it and to create something in the world and to use my experiences. We have something in trauma called post-traumatic growth, when you're able to look at your experiences through the lens of like a positive lens, like, wow, I came through that and I'm so much stronger as a result of it. versus I'm a victim and I'm powerless and there's nothing I can do to control myself. That's learned helplessness, and that often comes with trauma. But when we help people to shift their perspective and shift those energies of trauma that are making them look at themselves as a victim, they can be more like that Phoenix bird. So that's really my vision. I'm really excited for this creation and to dovetail on it as well. I've been a busy bee these last 2 years. I also have a book that's going to be coming out very soon, hopefully in August, called What If You're Not as Fucked Up as You Think You Are? And this book is really it's a compendium of all my life's work. I'm going to be talking more about all these things. I have a whole chapter devoted to trauma. I have lots of resources and tools. It's kind of a book and workbook, because each chapter at the end of it has home play that takes you through a specific technique or modality and has you looking at the way you're seeing yourself and how you can change that. So very exciting stuff coming down the pike. So excited to have you guys on board. I really would love to hear from you all as to what ideas you have, what you want to see, what we could collaborate on, how can we help this bird fly, and what can it create in the world. So thanks everyone for tuning in today. More to come soon. Go ahead and check us out. If you can help us grow our email list, you can go to the website, firebird-healing.com. We also have our social media. Right now we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So you can check us out there, follow us on there. We will have stuff on YouTube. It's all growing. It's all just a little baby in its infancy right now, but lots more to come. And I can't wait to see what we can create. Thanks, everyone.